Today I want to make a video for contemplatives. This video, anyone could watch it. I'm going to make a series of these and they're going to be shorter. So just digestible pieces of information. So this video is for contemplatives, people who already have a rich, deep prayer life. And I think it's fair to say that this is the most important thing you'll ever learn for how your prayer life that you've developed and that has been grown in you by God can be a gift to the people around you. And I think it is the most powerful way that you can have a positive impact on the people around you because of your contemplative life. So I hope anyone who has a rich contemplative life, please watch this series. I've watched this transform people's lives so deeply. And I don't think almost anyone does it. I don't think very many people have heard about it. I kind of just stumbled upon it on accident, and it has been life-changing for me and for a lot of other people. So let's start by saying this video really is for contemplatives. If you're not already a contemplative, I think you could do this, but the learning curve for it to be effective would be longer. But I'm not saying that it couldn't work. I wouldn't want to exclude someone. I'm going to use children as an example right now, but it could be spouses, friends. It could be pets. I'll do a whole series, I think, for pets. But let's first talk about it this way. Assuming you have a rich contemplative life. And what I mean by that is that you have a prayer rule and that you're spending a minimum of a half an hour to an hour twice a day in prayer, morning and night. And when I say, in any of my videos, if I say someone has a rich contemplative prayer life, I mean that. Anything less than that won't do. So this video really is for people that have been spending a good deal of time in prayer regularly for a while now. And if you've been doing that, then you have noticed that as maybe you're just saying the Lord's Prayer again and again, or maybe you're saying the Hail Mary, or maybe you've picked a word like Jesus that you're just repeating over and over to stay focused on God, and with the intent to let God heal your soul. If you're doing that practice, then you have noticed a healing and a transmission from God into your soul. You've noticed, let me make sure I say this in a way that never confuses anybody. I'm not saying during prayer you necessarily notice that. You may, but you may not. But you have noticed that since you began a prayer rule and you're spending regular time in prayer, you have noticed that the spiritual journey is unfolding in a way that it never did before, that it's more thorough, it's deeper, it's more complete, and more rich. Significantly more rich. You've noticed that. And so you've noticed that if you have a rich prayer life, you have come to see that there is nothing in your life more important than that prayer life. That there are many things that matter, there's many people especially that matter. There are dimensions to being a human that all matter. But you've learned and you've come to see for yourself that your time spent in prayer is the most important time you can ever spend. And that it changes you more profoundly than any other activity or thing that you could engage in. And some of you will have come from a psychological background where maybe you received a lot of therapy, or a personal transformation background, like some of the people I work with that are coming out of the New Age into Christianity. And some of those things really helped you. But you've noticed now that you have a deep contemplative life, that nothing touches your soul so profoundly as your prayer life with God. And you've come to see it as sacred, and you've come to see it as something you would never miss, something you value and cherish above all other things. So I'm talking to people who have this, and anyone who's interested, of course. But to those who have this, you have this. And don't you wish you could just give it to people? Don't you wish you could pass it on? And with some caveats and limitations, what if I told you there was a way to directly transmit this to other pets, human beings, your children? I'm primarily thinking of parents with kids, but it matters everywhere. And I think that I found a way. And I've been doing it now for many years. And it's profound and powerful, and it turns out you can transmit this to people. Now, there's some caveats. You can't give someone who's not practicing prayer regularly what you have. But you can give it to them for a while. You can expose their soul to a depth with God. God will come through you in a way that will touch these people and heal them. And it wouldn't replace a deep prayer rule for themselves. They would need to do that. But if they didn't, it would still really profoundly affect their life for the better in lots of ways, which I don't want to bog this video down with too many details, but I guess I could just in a preliminary way say that emotional healing, psychological transformation, and spiritual growth, which is really the source of emotional and psychological transformation, deep spiritual growth can be passed on to others. And so you're probably now saying, get to what? Like, what do you do? And I'm going to use my daughter as the example, but I do this with lots of people on a regular basis. But I'm going to use my daughter because I really am hoping that people with children hear this. So, I've got a daughter, she's 15, and since about 4 years old or so, I did it all before that too, but it occurred to me that it would be that if I laid my hands on my daughter while she was sleeping and prayed, that it might be powerful for her in a way that it isn't if I just am in another room praying for my daughter. It occurred to me that I could put my hands on her and pray and go into a contemplative state of prayer, and that would transmit. And it occurred to me way before I had a daughter. I practiced on other people and tried it. But what I found out is that it directly transmits. So you go into a contemplative state of prayer. You're saying your Holy Mary, Hail Mary over and over, or you're saying the Lord's Prayer. You're saying the Jesus Prayer from the Orthodox Church. You're using your repetitive prayer not to be heard by God. God doesn't need us to repeat to be heard, but to keep your attention on God and not put your attention and will on other things. And as you do that, you're brought into deeper and deeper states of being. What I found is that if I put my hands on someone else and do that for their sake, it transmits to them. And it's not a placebo, although if I'm talking to people with a rich prayer life, I don't think you're likely to think it's a placebo. But someone less initiated in or less deep might think, it's just a placebo. When I work on my daughter, it's usually about 2 a.m. and she's asleep. She doesn't know I've come in. I have her permission to come in. I put my hands on her hip. She's always sleeping on one side or another. I just put my hands on her hip. And I spend, anywhere from 25 minutes to an hour with my hands on her hips or her hip, sometimes her head when she was younger. And I prop my elbows up on pillows so I'm comfortable. I'm sitting in a little stool that we have just for that purpose. I get as comfortable as I can be. I'm leaning into a pillow on the bed so I can relax. And then I begin my contemplative prayer. But now it's for her. I'm not thinking of it for me. I'm thinking of it for her. And even though I want to do more detail on this, some things matter to say. The first is, just as you can't have an agenda with God when you go into prayer with God, you can't be telling God to give you love or telling God you want this raise or telling God you want this attribute. You've learned, if you have a rich life, that you're not in control, and God's going to bring to you what God is going to bring to you. When prayer is effective, it's because it aligns to God's will. It doesn't pull God to your will. So you've learned this, that the agenda kills the prayer life. And that if you have an agenda of any kind, it keeps you shallow and keeps you from being deep. Well, the same rules apply here, but they're even more important. So, I have a daughter. I care about her. I love her. I want the best for her in her life. But when I put my hands on her and pray for her in this way, it is none of my business what God is going to give to her or do in her life. And if I have any agenda at all, it is deeply sinful. I'm essentially trying to boss God around. I'm essentially trying to force some result. And I think this might be exaggerated to say, but I don't know if it's completely exaggerated. I think that when you pray for things in this life for yourself or others, without a deep surrender to only wanting God's will, it is a kind of sorcery or a kind of magic. And I mean that in the negative sense of the term, in the very deeply Christian, Judeo-Christian sense of the term, that it is anathema to do those kinds of things. And I can't stress enough how strongly you must receive this message, that you have to have no agenda at all. You could ask God for something, but only if you really can say after, your will, not mine, be done. And then only if while your hands are on that person, you're not trying to make that thing happen. You've got to get out of the way. And I think you get out of the way so more can come through. The way I look at agenda is God has everything to give. And then when we're in agenda, we want this one thing, and we're excluding all of the infinite grace that God has to bring us. And that's the most positive way of viewing it. I also think you're getting in there meddling with another person's life, and you could get in there trying to manipulate. I'm not saying you could manipulate. Maybe you could, but I'm just saying that you're trying to. And in trying to, you're bordering on sorcery and evil. So it is essential, it's profoundly essential, that this is all done in Christ. And what I mean when I say done in Christ is that you've divorced your will and your particular desires from it completely. And you're just saying, just like you do with your own prayer life, God, you know what's better for me. I don't know the way. You know the way. I don't have what it takes to get there. You show me. Give me what I need. Whatever I need, I will receive. And now you're having that exact same pure intent for the person you're placing your hands on. And if you do this, it will work. It will work. But there's a little bit of a learning curve. And I don't know how much I should say in the first video. I guess kind of an overview so you know what's happening. It seems as if when I put my hands on someone, I feel like they do. And so, sometimes I'll do 5 in a day. I'll have 5 people a day come in sometimes, or 6 sometimes, where, it's 6 hours of it. I'll do one person, I'll do another person, I'll do another, but they just come and lay down. I do it, they leave. Another person comes in, I do it, they leave. Sometimes we don't talk at all. They just come in for the prayer and leave. And each person is a completely different experience to touch, put your hands on, and experience the work with. It's the prayer with. It's incredible. And I've learned so much from it. So, I used to, for a long time, when I was a little more self-centered, I think I'm a little less self-centered now. When I was more self-centered, I think that it took me too long to realize it had something to do with the person on the table. I would wonder, why do I struggle when I'm working on this person and it's so easy on that person? Why do I struggle praying for this person? It feels chaotic or stressful or shallow or not very deep. And then another person comes to the room and it feels very deep. And what I've come to see is that there's 2 factors. There's always the factor of just where am I and how am I doing? Where am I spiritually? That's always part of the equation. But the other part of but I can monitor that. I can know how I'm doing. The other part of the equation is, where are they at spiritually, and where are they at as a soul? Where are they at in the terms of stages? How deeply are they initiated into the path of Christ? How is it for them? And Also not just how deep it is, but what are they going through at the time? Somebody could have a lot of things coming up to work through, to be processed, to be healed, purification from the Holy Spirit. And a session like that could be quite turbulent. It could be, you could feel like, it's like, let's say, if you know what it's like to get into a deep contemplative state easily, and you also then probably know what it's like to sit down for 40 minutes and feel like you just tried the whole time and didn't get very deep. Well, the same thing applies when you're working on another person in this way, when you're praying for them in this way. The same thing applies, but it has a dual cause. It can be you, but it can also be them, so that if they can't get very deep, you can't. And I better say this too then. When someone isn't going deep, either because they can't or they've maybe they're struggling in their will with God and they don't want to go deep. Maybe they've in some way sort of pushed God away. What I've learned, the key is if I have any attachment at all, not just to an outcome, because I don't do outcome attachment. I don't want anything to do with creating something in somebody. It is God's will and not mine, and it's none of my business. But there's also just a care for that person that they would do well, whatever the well is. So it's a more subtle kind of attachment and agenda, but it's still agenda. What I've learned is when someone is really struggling, or when they're not necessarily doing their own work very deeply, the key for me is to not be attached at all to them getting something good, getting anything. I have to be profoundly detached from the outcome for that person, not just in the form the outcome takes, but in the whether it takes at all, or the degree to which anything from God comes through. And if I could be totally detached, then I don't share in their burden. But if I'm not totally detached, I'll feel like they feel. And sometimes I'll struggle internally in ways that I haven't struggled with in years, or sometimes in ways I've never struggled with, because they're a different person than me and they have different things. But I'll experience it mirrored in me, what's going on in them. The more detached you are, the less that happens. You should just be all the way detached and just be praying only that God's love and God's truth and in God's way, God's will be done for them. And if you do that, you'll find yourself having a pretty clear experience. Okay, so then how powerful will it be? Why is it more powerful with one person than another? Why is it sometimes just more powerful? There's mystery here. We don't know God's mind. We don't know God's will. Your holiness, your level of spiritual prayer, your level of prayer, your level of advancement on the journey of grace has an effect on how much can come through you. But that also has massive caveats. You can't measure it very well because we're dealing with mysteries that are beyond us. But I can say it's true that level of prayer matters. But any level of prayer can transmit to someone and help them. And then there's also God's grace, which, you could be like at a low level of prayer, but God's grace can pour through and do great things in a person. So the last thing I want to say for this video is I've seen this kind of work, this prayer work is the way I like to refer to it, really heal people. I've seen physical cures take place. I've seen people cure cancer. I've seen people cure vision problems, hearing problems, help people transform emotionally and spiritually. I've seen it really works. And there is a mystery as to when, like if you prayed for someone with cancer, they didn't get well. I don't know why. I just don't know. There's all kinds of reasons I do know can be a part of it. The problem is there's this mystery involved where I don't know. So I don't want to try to lay down something systemic because I don't know why. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't on a miracle cure. But I have one thought I want to share because it's really helped me. So you read about the saints. Some of them had a sort of a gift of healing, but they were also really holy. And then they were able to, look at the early disciples, they raised the dead. So they had a lot of power coming through them from God. And so they might have had a gift of healing, and then they're also really holy, and so they're just more effective. Their prayer is more effective. The prayer of a righteous person is more effective. They're more effective. But I thought to myself, okay, I'm not that, I can't do that, but there is a trickle coming through me. It's not always, but sometimes I can even notice it the Holy Spirit coming through me into the person. I can feel that happening. And so I thought, okay, there's a trickle coming through me, but maybe if I did tons of periods of prayer on this person, it would accumulate into something bigger. And I can't do that for strangers, and I can't even do that for fellow contemplatives necessarily. Some people I might work on 2 or 3 times a week. But this is where I was thinking of parents with children. My daughter had a vision problem. I don't remember the name of the diagnosis. It doesn't matter. But the thing is, I took her in to get her vision checked. She had pretty poor vision, and the diagnosis was the shape of the eye there's something wrong with the shape of the eye, and it doesn't get better. They said it would never get better. It probably would get worse, and it was already pretty bad. And my lack of faith and my attachment to my daughter, it just wrecked me. I was wrecked, and I couldn't conceive of this. She was just 3, or 2, and it just broke my heart. And so I said, that's it. I'm going to work on her a lot every night for an hour. And I did that. And a couple of times I got into a very deep contemplative state where, like, little flashes of white light, sometimes you'll see that or something. It looks like white light for a minute or something. But I didn't get anywhere very, very high. I didn't get into heaven or, total union with God or something. But this trickle, I just thought maybe God would heal her eyes with this trickle if I did it every night for a period of time. So I did it every night for 6 months or something. And then we just took her back in and got her checked again. It might've been 9 months. I'm just guessing on the time. I don't time things, but it was a long time, almost every night, if not every night, for 45 minutes or an hour. I was asking God to heal her vision, but I did, of course, I said, but your will be done. Just your will be done. It's none of my business. But if it's up to me, I'm helping, and I'd put my hands over her eyes if I could. Sometimes when she'd be sleeping, if I put my hands on her eyes, she'd resist. So I would put it on her above her, like right below her neck, upper chest, and head. And I would just pray for her. And anyway, it did reverse the diagnosis. It did. And she doesn't wear glasses today. I don't know if she needs them. She kind of quit wearing them. I think she has a little bit of vision trouble, but it got way better, and it shouldn't have. And it's also fair to say that the diagnosis, I don't remember the name of it, but the diagnosis that she got isn't the kind of diagnosis that's easily misdiagnosed. The shape of the eye thing is an easy thing. It's really true. So it did a miracle. But the thing is, it took, I don't know how many sessions it took. I don't know, but let's just say it took all of them. Let's say her eyes were better the day before we went in, finally. Just a little bit got better all the time. Then that means it took about 9 months of almost nightly periods of prayer for that to happen. And that's something I want you to know, that it has a cumulative effect. So you can, not that it cures everything. I'm not saying it will cure everything. That's not my experience. Maybe at a higher level of holiness, that will be the way it is, but it's not my experience now. But what I'm trying to say is that it really does work. And it did that for her eyes, but think about your kids right now, or your spouse. Maybe you don't have kids, you have a spouse or a pet. But really, people right now, they go out in the world, and it's just it's so sinful out there. I mean, there's just ego and pride and greed and chaos and dishonesty and confusion and the world's values it pollutes you. And, even a good person, these kids come out of the womb pretty good. They're sweet and I know they're not perfect, but they're so sweet. And then they go to school, and they get online. If you let your kids online, and they get poisoned and it pollutes them. And you can see it. You see these kids filled with life and light, and you see adults just drooped over. And what happened? It slowly just got snuffed out of them by the world and the pain of the world and the suffering of the world. Well, this prayer work erases a lot of it. It goes a long way towards erasing the suffering in a person, and it doesn't rob them of they work through it in the same way you would in a period of prayer or a period in your life where you're being heavily purified by God and you feel God's really working on you and changing you. They do that while you're doing this prayer for them. And like I said, I do it when my daughter's asleep. The people that come in are not asleep when they come in, but they usually fall asleep during the prayer. And I just do it when my daughter's asleep and she twitches and, it's clear she's working through things and it's kept her brighter. It is absolute. And other people who have kids have done this and it just keeps their kids so much brighter, so much less darkened by the world. And I would say certainly more than talking to them about Jesus does. More. No words at all. Just you have Christ. You put your hands on someone and pray for them and they get Christ through you. My daughter's open to it. Some people are less open, so there can be some little issues there with how open is their will to God. And then the last thing I want to say for this video is, if you've been on the prayer life for a long time, you probably, it may not have, but almost certainly, most people at least, have experienced periods that are so dry it seems like it isn't working. And that can also happen when you're working on a person, when you're praying for a person. So you put your hands on your kid and it's deep for 6 months and then all of a sudden it dries up. And I've experienced that with people where it's dried up for months at a time. And if you're pushing, trying to make them go deep, you're in sin and you're hurting yourself and it feels terrible. But if you could detach completely, I believe that it's possible if you're a sensitive type of person just to notice that it's still subtly affecting them. What I'm trying to say is we don't quit praying when it's dry. We persevere. And dryness leads to greater depths. And I've noticed that praying for others is the same. They may go dry for a long period, but I've noticed they come out of it if you persist in prayer for them. And then and the very last thing is someone, and you can't control what people are going to do, but someone is going to say, yeah, I pray for people. I do this already, but I need you to know that I've done serious experimentation with this. And if I sit in the next room and pray for my daughter just as sincerely, and then go in and pray for her for an hour with my hands on her, that hour with my hands on her is immensely more effective. It's not close. It's not comparable. It makes sitting in the other room and doing it feel like neglect, because it is neglectful. It just is not even close to as effective. So don't think, yes, I pray for people. I know about this. I know that if you pray for other people, you've had some sacred moments while praying for other people. I believe you. I have too. And I do this. But this is different. There's some supernatural good involved and natural good involved. And it transmits through this prayer. And so if you're contemplative, if you have this prayer life, you really need to experiment with this and try this and come to understand this. With all the warnings I gave about agenda and outcomes and all of that and attachment, you really got to do this. And I think you're going to see that it is a very powerful gift that you can give a person. Someone who's struggling, if you have a spouse that you love, you could give it to them on a regular basis, 2-3 times a week, and just watch it just clean things up a bit. Just watch it. You'll see it in their daily life. Then the last thing, last thing, it's, I don't know why, but it's more effective than if they prayed for an hour or if you only prayed for an hour. Something about the two people together, it's way more powerful. It's a different thing than just prayer. Okay, and then, so there's a quality there that transmits to them that's better than if they just were praying for themselves, but that doesn't replace their own prayer life because that's its own animal. And then the other thing I guess you should know is that if you pray for someone else for an hour in this way, it doesn't count as your prayer life. And I don't know why, but it's not, I pray in the mornings. I try to pray for a good period of time in the mornings. And when I started doing regular morning sessions on people, I thought I probably don't need to do my own meditation in the morning because I'm going to be going in and doing 3 in a row on people who come in. We don't talk, so I could be very quiet. And I just found that it just doesn't work. It doesn't. I still need my own personal thing I'm doing with God. And then this kind of prayer is me sharing that with people, I think is the way to look at it. So that's the video. I'll make more videos. If people are interested in this, ask questions below. I will read them and respond. Okay, thanks everyone.